My name is Margaret Ellison. I am 67 years old, retired school librarian, and I live in a quiet town in northern Michigan. For most of my life, I was the one people came to when something needed fixing: a schedule, a dinner plan, a broken heart. I believed that love meant giving, and that patience could heal anything. Until the morning my daughter called to cancel our Hawaii vacation. She said it so casually, as if she were canceling a hair appointment. "Mom, we have to cancel Hawaii. Something came up." Her voice was crisp, polite, and efficient, the voice she uses with colleagues. For a second, I thought maybe she was short on money. Weddings cost a fortune after all. So I said softly, "That's all right, Claire. We can go another time." I remember stirring honey into my tea, thinking how small my kitchen felt that morning, but that wasn't the end of it. Later that afternoon, while the tea had gone cold and the clock on the wall ticked too loudly, my phone rang again. A cheerful woman's voice filled the room. "Margaret, this is Linda Harper, Daniel's mother. I just wanted to thank you for giving up your spot on the Hawaii trip because of your health issues. It's so generous of you." My heart went still. "My health issues?" I asked. "Oh, yes," she said sweetly. "Daniel told me you've been having dizzy spells. Your doctor advised you not to fly. I think it's very wise of you. At our age, we have to be careful." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a crow cawed in the distance. I could almost hear my own pulse. Dizzy spells? Doctor's orders? I hadn't been dizzy a day in my life. I placed the cup down carefully because my hands were shaking. Not from anger, but from realization. They hadn't canceled the vacation at all. They'd replaced me. I took a slow breath. "Well, Linda," I said in the calmest voice I could find, "I hope you enjoy yourself." Then I hung up, and in that click, something broke, and something else was born. Because when the plane finally landed in Honolulu a few days later, the calls began. First one, then another, and then so many that my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Claire's voice was high, panicked, desperate. The hotel couldn't find their reservation. The card wouldn't go through. Daniel was furious. Linda was embarrassed. I sat in my kitchen with my tea, listening to the phone vibrate across the table. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to. I already knew what they were going to say. That was the moment I stopped being their safety net and started being my own person. When my daughter said our Hawaii vacation was canceled, I thought it was about money. But when her future mother-in-law called to thank me for giving up my spot because of my health, I just said, "Enjoy yourself." And when their plane landed, the calls started. She was in a panic. The truth? I hadn't lost my balance. I'd simply stopped holding everyone else up. The steam from the tea curled upward, the light shifted across the counter, the clock ticked into a different rhythm, and I realized, for the first time in decades, I wasn't dizzy. I was perfectly steady. If you've ever spent your life keeping everyone else afloat, only to realize no one even noticed you were sinking, then maybe you'll understand what I did next. But let's start from the beginning, before the lies, before the phone calls, before I learned that silence could be stronger than shouting. Because every quiet revolution has a moment when a woman decides, enough. After that day, silence became my closest companion. My house had always been quiet, but it felt different now, denser, almost like the air carried memories that refused to leave. Every morning, the same sequence unfolded: the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, the kettle whistling as if reminding me that time still moved, even when life seemed to stand still. I live in a small white house on the edge of a Michigan town that barely makes it onto maps. I have lived here for 32 years. I raised my daughter in this house. I buried my husband's ashes beneath the maple tree in the backyard. The floors still creak in the same places they did when we first moved in. Back then, the sound meant life, energy, family. Now it's only me. The creaks echo like questions no one answers. My husband, Robert, passed away 9 years ago. Heart attack in his sleep. He was the kind of man who fixed everything. The leaky sink, the broken car, my bad moods. When he died, people said, "You're so strong, Margaret." I nodded, because that's what widows do. But inside, I was less strong than hollow. I became the woman who keeps moving out of habit, like a clock that doesn't realize its battery is dying. Sometimes I think about who I was before I became Mom or Mrs. Ellison. I used to dream about opening a small bookstore. I imagined a front window filled with plants and sunlight, shelves smelling of paper and cedar, people coming in not to buy something, but to breathe. I even had a name for it, the Quiet Corner. But dreams shrink when bills grow, and after Claire was born, there wasn't time for quiet corners anymore. Still, I can't regret it. Motherhood was the best and hardest part of my life. When Claire was little, she used to curl beside me while I read aloud from Charlotte's Web. Her hair smelled like apple shampoo. She'd say, "Mom, promise you'll never be old." I'd laugh. Now she's 28, and when she calls, her voice is brisk, distracted, as if she's somewhere else already. I often sit by the kitchen window watching the seasons change across my backyard. Michigan winters can feel endless. The snow piles high along the fence, turning everything white and silent. I once loved that stillness. Now it feels like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for something that never happens. Across the street lives Mrs. Price, 72, my neighbor and the closest thing I have to a friend. She's a retired nurse with a quick laugh and an even quicker wit. Every Thursday, she invites me for tea at 4. She insists on using real china cups with faded blue roses. She says, "Paper mugs make life feel disposable." This Thursday, she poured the tea and gave me that look, the kind friends use when they see through your polite smiles. "You've always been the glue, Margaret," she said, "but who holds you together?" The words lingered long after I went home. Who holds me together? For decades, I've been the steady one, the organizer, the listener. I helped my husband's parents through illness, my daughter through college, even Daniel through his first layoff. Everyone's crisis had a space in my life. Mine never did. That night, I opened the drawer of my old desk and found a yellowed photograph. Robert holding baby Claire, sunlight on their faces. I traced their outlines with my thumb. For a moment, I could almost hear their laughter again. Then the refrigerator clicked on, and the present reclaimed me. I walked through the house, touching the objects that defined me: the tea kettle, the stack of library books I still borrow out of habit, and the small brass key that once locked my husband's study. Each carried a whisper of a life that revolved around others. The ticking clock grew louder. It's been ticking for 20 years, a wedding gift from my sister, and sometimes I think it ticks louder, just to prove that something in this house still remembers rhythm. I stood beneath it, watching the second hand move in circles, over and over, always returning to the same place. I realized that's what my life had become: a circle, caring, sacrificing, waiting, hoping that one day the people I'd held together would remember to look back and see who was holding the strings. I used to believe being needed was the same as being loved. It took me 67 years to learn that they aren't the same thing at all. Being needed is temporary, being loved is eternal. Somewhere between packing lunches and paying bills, I settled for temporary. But something inside me was beginning to change. Maybe it started the day Claire lied about Hawaii. Maybe it started years ago, quietly, when the house became too still. Either way, a new awareness had begun to hum beneath the surface, like a wire coming back to life. I made myself another cup of tea, stood in the kitchen where the morning light faded into dusk, and listened to the sound of my own breathing. The clock ticked on, steady, unbothered, like it had nowhere to be. And for the first time, I noticed that I was matching its rhythm. Slow, calm, deliberate. Outside, Mrs. Price's porch light flicked on. She waved from her window, two silhouettes separated by the glow of early evening. I waved back, smiling faintly. Maybe we were both learning how to live with the quiet. When I turned off the kitchen light, the ticking followed me down the hall. Not haunting, just reminding. Time doesn't stop for anyone. But sometimes, if you listen closely enough, it gives you one more chance to start over. And I was beginning to think maybe mine hadn't run out yet. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The light slanted through the blinds, striping the kitchen table in pale gold and shadow. I was rinsing a mug when the phone rang. The sound was ordinary. What came after it wasn't. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up. "Hi, Mom." Her tone was clipped, rushed, as if she were already late for something else. "Claire," I said, smiling into the receiver, "you sound busy." There was a pause, a mechanical sigh, the kind people give before delivering bad news. "Mom, we have to cancel Hawaii." Just like that. No greeting, no "how are you?" The words landed like cold water. I tried to keep my voice warm. "Oh, are you having trouble, honey? I can help if you're short on funds." Her answer came quickly, rehearsed. "It's just complicated. We'll go another time." My instinct was to ask why, but I stopped myself. I could hear another voice in the background, Daniel's, low, impatient. Something about timing and rescheduling. "Are you sure everything's all right?" I asked quietly. She exhaled into the phone. "It's fine, Mom, don't worry about it." And before I could respond, the line clicked. The silence that followed had its own shape, thick, almost solid. I set the phone down, staring at the faint smudge her fingerprints had left on the glass when she'd visited last month. The refrigerator hummed to life again, filling the space where her voice had been. A fly buzzed against the window pane. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started, then stopped. I stood there, one hand on the back of a chair, the other still holding the damp towel. The sunlight slid a little further across the table, revealing crumbs from breakfast, a ring of moisture where my teacup had sat. It struck me that Claire hadn't asked how I was doing in months. She used to call every Sunday. Now our talks had become bullet points. Weather, work, wedding updates, done. When did Mom become a task on her to-do list? I thought. I remembered when she was 10, and she'd call from the neighbor's yard to ask permission for another 5 minutes of play. Her voice used to be full of life then, rising and falling like a melody. Now it was all straight lines, flat, efficient, adult. I leaned against the counter, listening to the refrigerator's rhythm. It was oddly comforting, steady where people weren't. I poured myself another cup of tea, though I didn't really want it. Steam curled upwards, soft and ghostly, vanishing into the stillness. The old wall clock ticked in its patient way. I counted the seconds. 3 ticks to realize the call had ended. 10 ticks to understand what it meant. 60 ticks before the ache began to settle somewhere deep, somewhere familiar. I walked to the window. The backyard looked smaller somehow. The maple tree that held Robert's ashes swayed gently, as if it remembered something I'd forgotten. Claire and I had planned the trip for months. Her idea, actually. "Mom, you deserve something nice," she'd said when she booked it. "We'll have time to talk, maybe take those sunrise photos you love." She'd sounded excited then. Or maybe I just wanted to believe she was. I took the printed itinerary from the corkboard beside the fridge. The edges curled a little. The ink faded near the top where sunlight had touched it. I ran my finger over the word Honolulu, tracing the letters as if they could still take me somewhere. What does a mother do when her child starts building a life that no longer has space for her? I didn't know. I only knew how to stand very still and pretend it didn't hurt. Mrs. Price's laugh carried across the street, a sharp, cheerful sound that didn't belong to my mood. I envied her ease. She always seemed to know when to speak, when to listen, when to let things pass. The phone sat where I'd left it, dark and silent now. I almost called Claire back, but the image of Daniel's impatient face stopped me. I'd seen that expression before. People who think kindness is weakness. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of tea, and told myself it wasn't personal, that she was busy, distracted, young. But even the rationalizations rang hollow. The clock ticked on, each second another reminder that time moves whether love keeps up or not. I walked to the table and sat down. My hands trembled slightly when I reached for my cup. The ceramic was warm, grounding. The sunlight touched my wrist, a small comfort. I wanted to be angry, but what I felt was something colder, quieter, disbelief wrapped in fatigue. I'd spent so many years smoothing things over, making excuses for other people's rough edges. It was a habit now, an instinct I didn't know how to turn off. Still, somewhere under the disappointment, a smaller voice whispered, "Listen closely. Something isn't right." I ignored it then, but later, I would remember that whisper. It was the first warning bell. The afternoon drifted into evening. The golden light faded to gray, and the house returned to its usual hush. The call had lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it filled every corner of my mind. I washed the cup, dried it, and set it upside down on the rack. Simple motions, the kind that keep grief from spilling. The refrigerator clicked again. The sound was steady, reliable, unlike people. When I turned off the kitchen light, the reflection of the phone glowed faintly on the counter, a small red dot blinking once before dying. That tiny flash of color lingered in the darkness, like a pulse, and I remember thinking how strange it was that silence could feel so alive. 3 days passed before the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer. It was one of those heavy afternoons when the air felt thick, and even the sound moved slowly. The clock ticked behind me. The refrigerator hummed its endless note. I lifted the receiver anyway. "Margaret, this is Linda Harper," a voice sang through the line, bright and sugary, the kind of cheer that never meant what it sounded like. "I just wanted to thank you for being so thoughtful, giving up your Hawaii spot because of your health. What a selfless thing to do." For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misheard her. "My health? Oh yes," she continued, still sweet. "Daniel told me you've been having dizzy spells, that your doctor advised against flying. Poor thing. I hope you're feeling better." The words sat there between us like smoke. I stared at the tiled floor, at the faint outline where the sunlight fell. Dizziness. Doctor's orders. I hadn't seen a doctor in months. I hadn't been dizzy in years. I didn't respond right away. The pause stretched, soft but dangerous. She filled it with small talk. "I'm packing already," she said. "Claire's been wonderful with the arrangements. Such a capable young woman. You raised her well." I pressed my fingers against the cool countertop. My pulse was steady, too steady. Outside, through the kitchen window, I saw Mrs. Price bent over her garden, pruning the last of her roses. The late summer light caught the silver in her hair. She straightened for a moment, waving a gloved hand when she noticed me watching. She looked solid, alive, untouched by dizziness or weakness of any kind. A strange calm came over me. My voice found its shape again. "Well, Linda," I said evenly, "I hope you enjoy your trip." She hesitated. Maybe she'd expected a fuss or apology. "Oh, I'm sure we will. The weather looks perfect." "I'm sure it does." And I hung up. For a second, the house stayed very still. Then the kettle whistled high and sharp, startling me into motion. I turned it off and poured the water over the tea leaves I'd forgotten earlier. The scent of chamomile drifted up, sweet, too sweet. I sat down at the table, both hands around the cup. The porcelain was warm against my palms. Steam rose and twisted in the light, then disappeared. My heartbeat finally caught up with my thoughts. Dizzy spells, doctor's advice. The story wasn't careless, it was crafted. Someone had taken the time to make it sound believable. I looked at the sunlight spilling across the table. Dust floated in it like glitter, tiny fragments of stillness. The clock ticked once, then again, each sound a metronome to what I was beginning to understand. The first feeling was not anger, it was clarity. Everything I'd ignored in Claire's call came back now. Her tight voice, Daniel's muffled whisper, the rushed goodbye. They hadn't canceled the trip. They'd simply replaced me. The tea burned my tongue, but I didn't flinch. I set the cup down gently, watching the ring of water it left on the table. A perfect circle, like the patterns my life had been running in for years. Doing, giving, forgiving. Always circling back to being invisible. Mrs. Price was still outside, straightening her back, stretching her arms toward the sky before digging the shovel again. She moved with purpose, as if tending those roses meant something sacred. I envied her simplicity, how she lived by the soil and the seasons, not by people's shifting kindness. A breeze pushed through the window screen, carrying the scent of earth and cut grass. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the world was breathing with me. I closed my eyes. My heart gave one strong thud. Steady, certain. Not dizzy, not frail. Alive. That's when something in me shifted. It wasn't a scream or a vow, it was quieter than that. A tightening, like silk being pulled through a ring. A recognition that the story they'd written about me was not true, and that I didn't need to correct it with words. I could correct it with silence. I lifted the phone again, not to call anyone, but to hold it, to feel its weight. The receiver was cool, smooth, obedient. For years, I'd used it to soothe, to fix, to apologize. Now I set it back in its cradle like closing a door. The clock kept ticking. The refrigerator clicked off, leaving the air clean and thin. I could hear my own breathing, slow even. Slow down at the pivot, I thought, as if narrating my own life. Feel everything. Don't rush this. I touched the cup again, still half full. The light struck the tea's surface, turning it amber, almost golden. My reflection wavered there, small, framed by ripples, and I realized how long it had been since I'd actually looked at myself. I wasn't angry at Claire, not yet. What I felt was older, heavier. It was the weight of every moment I'd said yes when I meant no, every time I'd stepped aside so someone else could have space. This lie was simply the last page of a book I'd been writing unconsciously for decades. The house shifted as the wind moved through it, wood creaking like a sigh. I reached for the napkin holder and straightened it, not because it needed it, but because a small order felt necessary when larger truths were collapsing. Outside, Mrs. Price knelt again, patting soil around a new rose bush. Her movements were deliberate, patient, renewal through labor. I envied the clarity of her task: plant, water, wait. I stayed seated, staring at the swirl of sunlight on my table until it faded into the soft gray of evening. A single sentence looped through my head, steady as the ticking clock. No one gets to write my story but me. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call Claire to ask why. I didn't plan what to do next. I just let the quiet settle until it felt less like emptiness and more like space. Space to breathe, to think, to begin again. Somewhere deep inside, something had woken up. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in the half-dark, the clock ticking on my nightstand, each second landing like a tiny tap on my ribs. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. I brewed a pot of coffee. Not tea this time. Tea was for comfort. Coffee was for clarity. The air smelled of roasted determination as I carried my cup into the dining room. The sunlight crept slowly across the table, illuminating a neat stack of folders and printed itineraries. I spread everything out. Every receipt, every email confirmation, every itinerary I'd once printed for safekeeping. Airfare, resort bookings, car rentals, tours, spa appointments, dinner reservations. My handwriting appeared on each page, small and careful. Every document had one thing in common: my name, my credit card, my contact information. Not Claire, not Daniel, me. It was a strange kind of revelation, not the kind that sparks rage, but the kind that cools you completely. The kind that strips emotion away until only fact remains. Funny how deception collapses when you read the fine print. I said the words softly to myself, like a prayer. I turned on my laptop. The familiar hum of the fan filled the quiet house. A new light filtered through the curtains, no longer cold morning gray, but something warmer, alive with purpose. The first call went to the resort. "Good morning, this is Margaret Ellison. I'd like to cancel a reservation for next week." The woman on the other end was polite, efficient. "Of course, Ms. Ellison, may I have your confirmation number?" 78153. Clicking keys, a pause. "Found it. The booking is under your name. Would you like a refund to the original payment method?" "Yes, please." Her voice smiled. "Refund approved. You'll receive confirmation by email within 24 hours. I thanked her and hung up. Then came the snorkeling tour, the sunset cruise, the spa, the car rental. Each call ended the same way. Polite voices, confirmation numbers, refund approved. Each approved landed like a soft heartbeat against the quiet air. I imagined Claire and Daniel packing their bags, rehearsing their lies, thinking the world would always bend to their version of reality, and perhaps in some ways it had, until today. The rhythm of my actions steadied me. Print, dial, confirm, hang up, click, type, send. The soundscape of quiet justice. At one point, I paused to sip my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I didn't mind. The taste was still sharp, grounding, the kind of bitterness that clears your senses rather than dulls them. On the desk, emails began to appear one by one. Subject: your refund has been processed. Subject: cancellation confirmed. Subject: reversal of charges completed. Each message felt like a piece of myself returning. Outside, the day had shifted. The gray light had softened into gold. The warmth reached through the window pane and spread across the papers, glinting on the black ink of my name. For years, I'd thought of power as something loud. Meetings, voices, decisions. But now I understood it could also live in quiet actions. A signature, a phone call, a button clicked with calm precision. I was not sabotaging their trip. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. The last cancellation was the helicopter tour, Daniel's surprise for Linda. I smiled faintly when the operator read back the details. "Yes, that's correct," I said. "The payment was made on my card. I'll need that refunded, please." "Of course, Ms. Ellison. We'll process that immediately." "Thank you. I appreciate your help." When I hung up, the silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt earned. I looked around the room. Sunlight warming the curtains, the air thick with quiet satisfaction. Each item on the table now held meaning again, not as remnants of betrayal, but as evidence of agency. I began to gather the papers into neat piles, smoothing each one as if sealing something final. My hands were steady. No shaking this time. On the last sheet, I wrote a small note in the corner. Lesson: never underestimate a woman who keeps her receipts. I smiled at that. The clock on the wall ticked in rhythm with my pulse. I could feel it again. The sense of being present, alert, alive. I sent the final email and closed the laptop. The screen went dark, reflecting a faint image of my face in the fading light. I studied it for a moment. The fine lines, the softness around the eyes. I looked neither angry nor sad, just awake. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. 12 slow chimes, measured and calm. I stood, stretching the stiffness from my shoulders. The sound filled the house, low and resonant, and for once, it didn't feel like time passing. It felt like time returning. As I rinsed my cup in the sink, a single thought crossed my mind. Not triumphant, not bitter, just true. Control isn't something people give you. It's something you quietly take back. Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, spilling gold across the maple tree in the yard, the same tree where I'd scattered Robert's ashes. For the first time in years, the light seemed to touch everything evenly. No corners left in shadow. I dried my hands, turned toward the window, and whispered, "We're all right, love." Because we were. And by the time the kettle clicked off again, the house felt different. Not bigger, not louder, but balanced. Like justice, finally, finding its way home. By the next morning, I knew the refunds alone weren't enough. Justice, if it was to mean anything, had to extend beyond money. It had to touch the roots, the habits, the unspoken assumptions that had grown like ivy around my life. I poured tea into my favorite cup, the one with the chipped rim and faded violets, and sat at my desk. The quiet felt alive again, humming with decision. My laptop glowed softly, patient and waiting. On the screen was the tab for the joint account Claire and I had opened 3 years ago. We'd called it the Family Fund. The idea had been innocent enough, shared emergencies, mutual trust. But over time, the balance became less about emergencies and more about expectation. It had turned into a quiet assumption that I would always be there, cushioning every fall, solving every oversight. I stared at the number on the screen, $47,000. Years of careful saving, small sacrifices, the money I'd set aside not for myself, but for us. That word, us, suddenly felt very fragile. I hovered my hand over the mouse. It wasn't anger that moved me. It was a calm, surgical precision, the same composure I'd seen in nurses who stitch wounds without trembling. I closed the joint account, I would later tell myself in narration, every cent I earned and saved, gone from their reach. Some call it cruel, I call it clarity. I clicked. The cursor blinked once like a heartbeat. Then the transfer confirmation screen appeared. Transfer the entire balance to a new account? Yes. I entered my new account details, one I'd opened quietly the previous afternoon at a bank across town, under a different branch, a different password, protected by two-step verification and security questions no one but me could answer. My mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, the color of the car Robert and I bought the year we married. Each answer felt like a breadcrumb leading back to who I used to be, who I was reclaiming now. I pressed confirm. The progress bar filled slowly, almost theatrically. Then came the notification. Transfer successful. Account balance $0. I exhaled. The kind of breath that leaves the body cleaner than it entered. The family fund was gone. Outside, a bird fluttered onto the windowsill. A sparrow, ordinary and gray, pecking at something invisible. It tilted its head at me before flying off. I smiled faintly. Even the small creatures knew when to take what was theirs and move on. The moral question came later, as it always does. Was it right to move the money? To take what I had created and place it out of reach of the people who had learned to use my generosity as their safety net? A softer voice in me whispered, "You've done enough. You're allowed to protect yourself." Still, another voice argued, "But she's your daughter." Yes, she is. But being someone's mother doesn't mean surrendering your worth at every turn. I minimized the window and opened my email. The confirmation from the bank sat at the top of the inbox. Subject, transfer complete. I clicked it open, reading the words twice. There was no emotion in them, just sterile professionalism. But beneath that formality lay the quiet pulse of liberation. I set the cup of tea down beside the keyboard. The light hit the surface, turning the liquid amber, glowing like something sacred. Sometimes silence costs more than words. Whispered. It wasn't bitter. It was true. For years, I had filled silence with apologies, explanations, soft reassurances that only drained me further. Now, silence has become the truest expression of my boundaries. No shouting, no confrontation, no long letter explaining betrayal. Just the sound of a digital transaction completing, a single click that redrew the lines of power. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization settle. The moral conflict still tugged at me, that ache between love and self-respect. But it was a clean ache, like muscles remembering how to move after years of stiffness. Maybe Claire would be furious. Maybe Daniel would call it heartless. I could already imagine their words, self-righteous, panicked, dressed as concern. But the difference now was that their opinions no longer carried authority over my peace. My peace. I had almost forgotten how that word felt. I closed my eyes and pictured Claire as a child again. Her small fingers gripping mine at the grocery store, the way she'd tilt her head when she wanted to be carried. Back then, she thought I could fix everything. Maybe I did, for too long. It was time for her to learn what I had just remembered, that self-reliance is not coldness, it's clarity. The kettle clicked again, a quiet punctuation mark to the morning. I rose and refilled my cup, pouring slowly, watching the steam rise. The air smelled of something final and freeing. Mrs. Price's voice carried faintly from across the street, calling to her dog. The world was ordinary again, but I wasn't. I sat back down, folded the printed confirmation, and slipped it into a blue folder marked personal. The color felt right, steady, dignified, sure. For a moment, I thought of calling Claire, telling her what I'd done. But then I realized she'd find out soon enough, when her card stopped working. Let the lesson arrive naturally. I took one last sip of tea, now lukewarm but strong. It tasted of earth and resolve. In that quiet moment, I understood something I never had before, that justice doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes the truest victories are the ones you never explain. And as the sunlight spread across my desk, touching the bank papers and the teacup beside them, I felt it. Not triumph, not revenge, peace. The first call came at dawn. The sky over Michigan was still pale and cold, the kind of morning where the light feels thin. My kettle had just begun to whistle when the phone vibrated across the counter. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom!" Claire's voice cut through the line, high, sharp, already trembling. "The hotel says there's no reservation under our name." I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon clinking against porcelain. "That's terrible, dear. What will you do?" "What do you mean, what will I do? We've been standing here for 20 minutes. They're saying it was canceled." "Everything." Her voice fractured into static panic, the kind that comes when plans unravel in public. I could hear the background chaos, announcements over the airport speakers, luggage wheels clattering, Daniel's muffled frustration. Someone, a clerk probably, was explaining something in polite but firm tones. I said nothing. "Mom, are you there?" she demanded. "Yes, I'm here." "What's going on? Did you cancel it?" I blew gently over the cup, watching the steam curl. "I did handle the reservations, yes." "Well, they're saying everything was canceled yesterday." "How strange." I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through me. "Did you check your email?" "I'm not getting through to them. They're saying the payments were reversed. Daniel's furious. He's trying to talk to a manager." "I'm sure he is," I murmured. "He's quite persuasive when things don't go his way." "Mom, this isn't funny." "I don't imagine it is." For a moment, all I could hear was the background chaos. The sound of tourists rolling suitcases, the hum of jet engines in the distance. Then Daniel's voice broke through, raised and raw. "Try the card again!" Claire's tone shifted, desperate now. "Mom, can you call the bank? Maybe there's been some mistake. The card keeps getting declined." I watched the morning sunlight climb across my table, turning the tea a deeper gold. "That's awful, sweetheart. I wish I could help, but there must be some misunderstanding. Surely you budgeted for emergencies before you left?" Silence. I could almost see her face. The tight jaw, the wet eyes, the way she'd glance at Daniel for answers he didn't have. "Mom," she said finally, the word cracking open, "the card isn't working. It says the account's closed." "Closed?" I said softly. "Well, that can't be right." "It is right. We're stranded here and everything's twice the price. Mom, please, can you transfer something? Just to get us through the night?" I turned toward the window. Outside, the maple tree shimmered with morning light. A few leaves trembled loose and drifted down, soft and silent. "Claire," I said, my voice even, "do you remember what your father used to say about storms?" "What?" she snapped, breath hitching. "He said some storms don't come to destroy us. They come to clear the air." "Mom, this isn't the time for quotes." "Perhaps not," I said, and then very gently, "but it seems the air's getting clearer already." "Mom, please." The desperation in her voice brushed against something old in me, the part that still wanted to fix, to soothe. But I didn't. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You'll figure something out. You always do." And I ended the call. The click sounded final, but not cruel, just necessary. The kitchen was quiet again, only the steady hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock filled the air. The tea had cooled slightly, but I drank it anyway. The contrast between worlds was almost cinematic. The chaos of Hawaii, all noise and neon, against the calm of my Michigan kitchen, bathed in honeyed light. Somewhere thousands of miles away, my daughter was learning the price of convenience, the cost of deceit. I set the cup down and let the silence stretch. Then, faintly, I heard the soft ping of my email. Another confirmation. All cancellations processed. Refunds complete. Outside, Mrs. Price was watering her roses again. She glanced up, saw me through the window, and smiled. I smiled back, a small, secret smile. It wasn't a triumph I felt. It was equilibrium. The phone rang again. I didn't move. It rang, stopped bad, rang again. Then a voicemail notification blinked red on the screen. I didn't listen. Instead, I replayed the sound of the waves in my mind. the ones I'd seen years ago, the last time Robert and I had visited Hawaii together. I could still hear his voice teasing me for packing too many books, and still feel the weight of his hand when the tide pulled too hard. Maybe that's what peace was supposed to sound like. Waves receding, not crashing. The phone rang once more. I let it. Then silence. I looked around the kitchen, the soft light, the scent of tea, the faint reflection of myself in the window. That's when I realized the shift was complete. The balance of power, once tilted by guilt and obligation, had quietly righted itself. Claire and Daniel would learn something from this. Maybe humility, maybe consequence, maybe nothing at all. But for the first time, the outcome wasn't my burden to manage. I took another sip of tea. It was cold now, but it didn't matter. Sometimes warmth isn't in the cup. It's in the quiet you finally allow yourself to keep. 2 days later, the last of the refund emails arrived. I printed them all and placed them neatly in a folder labeled Resolved. For years, I had kept folders called Family, Bills, Claire's Wedding, Insurance. This was the first one that belonged solely to me. That morning, I woke to the sound of rain against the windows, Michigan rain, soft, gray, cleansing. I made tea, but I didn't drink it right away. I watched the steam rise and vanish, like a quiet metaphor for everything that had once defined me and was now gone. I opened my laptop and stared at the empty search bar. Where to? I typed it half as a question, half as a promise. The cursor blinked back at me, patient. Robert and I had always loved traveling, or rather, he loved the adventure, and I loved making it possible. The planning, the packing lists, the hotel confirmations. He used to say, "Margaret, you could organize heaven itself." And maybe I could have, if I'd ever thought to include myself on the itinerary. I closed the laptop, grabbed my umbrella, and stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The air smelled of wet earth and lilacs. I didn't plan to go far, just to clear my head. But I found myself standing in front of the old travel agency downtown. The faded sign above the window read Geller's Travel and Tours. My husband had once worked with Mr. Geller when planning a surprise trip to Italy for our 25th anniversary. Robert had called him the last honest man in the business. Inside, the bell above the door chimed, and a man looked up from behind the counter. His hair was mostly silver now, his glasses slipping halfway down his nose. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, rising to his feet. "Well, I'll be. It's been years." "Hello, Arthur," I said. "You still remember me?" "Of course, you and Robert were my favorite pair. Always so kind, so—" He paused, searching for the word. "So considerate. You'd plan every detail for everyone else before even thinking of yourselves." I smiled faintly. "That does sound familiar." He gestured for me to sit. "What brings you in today? Planning another family trip?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "This time it's just me." He blinked, then smiled softly. "Going alone, Mrs. Ellison?" "For the first time, yes." I met his gaze, feeling the truth of it settle like a stone in still water. And not alone, just finally with myself. Something in his expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or understanding. He nodded once, like someone witnessing a moment that didn't need words. "Well then," he said, pulling a leather notebook from beneath the counter. "Where would you like to go?" I looked past him at the wall of photographs behind the desk. Beaches, cities, mountains, postcards from people who'd gone and written thank you for the memories. My eyes stopped on one image, rolling green cliffs dropping into blue water, small white houses scattered like pearls. "The Azores," I said. "I'd like to see the ocean from there." Arthur's eyebrows lifted. "Beautiful choice. Peaceful, unspoiled. Not many people pick it as their first solo trip." "I'm not most people," I said gently. He chuckled. "No, you never were." As he began typing, I watched his fingers move over the keyboard. Swift, confident, the same rhythm I'd once used to plan trips for others. The sound was oddly comforting, like order being restored. "Do you have a preference for the hotel?" he asked. "Somewhere quiet, with a view of the sea, if possible." He looked up. "That can be arranged." While he worked, I glanced around the small office, the same potted fern by the window, the same faint hum of the air conditioner. Only the framed photographs had changed. New faces, new destinations. The world kept moving, even when I hadn't. Arthur turned the monitor toward me. "Here's one I think you'll like. A small villa on São Miguel Island. They call it the Green Island. It has cliffs, hot springs, and a view you'll never forget." I studied the images on the screen. The turquoise water, the volcanic lakes, the cobblestone streets lined with hydrangeas. It didn't feel like running away. It felt like walking home through a different door. "That's perfect," I said. He printed the itinerary, slid it across the counter. "You'll leave Thursday morning. Shall I book it under your name?" I smiled. "Yes, just mine." When I handed him my credit card, he looked at the name embossed in gold letters, Margaret Ellison. He hesitated, then said softly, "I'm glad you're doing this, Margaret. It's about time someone took care of you." "Maybe that's what I've been learning," I said, "that taking care of myself isn't selfish. It's overdue." Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The sky was opening, the air clearer. I stepped out of the agency with the folder in my hand, the ticket peeking from the top. The wind carried the faint scent of the lake, cool and clean. I walked past shop windows reflecting my figure back at me. A woman not diminished, not old, just ready. The kind of readiness that comes when you finally stop waiting for permission. At home, I placed the travel papers on the dining table where the Hawaii itinerary had once been. The same space, but a different story. I packed lightly, linen dresses, a straw hat, Robert's old camera, and a book I'd never had time to finish. I added the small brass key from his study drawer, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps as a reminder that not everything lost stays locked away forever. That night, I watched the forecast on television. Sunshine in the Azores, gentle winds, calm seas. The piano in the background of the commercial played softly, the same notes Robert used to hum when we drove together. When I turned off the lights, the reflection of the packed suitcase shimmered in the window like a quiet affirmation. Tomorrow, I will board a plane for the first time alone. No itinerary built around someone else's comfort. No voice telling me what I couldn't or shouldn't do. Just me, and the sound of the ocean waiting. The air in the Azores smelled like salt and lemon leaves. My villa overlooked the Atlantic, blue that never ended, waves folding over themselves like breathing. On my second morning, I wandered down a cobblestone path toward a small tea shop nestled between two whitewashed cottages. A hand-painted sign swung gently in the breeze, Casa de Cha Lucia. Inside, it smelled of honey and rain. Shelves lined with teapots, jars of herbs, and dried orange peels caught the morning light. Behind the counter stood a woman with silver hair pinned into a soft knot, her eyes the color of sea glass. "Bom dia," she said, smiling. "You are new here." "Yes," I said. "Just arrived." She poured a pot of tea before I'd even asked. "Then you'll want this one," she said. "It helps people find their breath again." I took a seat near the open window. The sound of the waves slipped in, steady and unhurried. She joined me with her own cup, sitting across the table as if we'd known each other for years. "I'm Lucia," she said. "And you?" "Margaret." "Ah, Margaret," she repeated slowly, tasting the syllables like a familiar flavor. "You look like someone who's finally decided to stop apologizing." The comment startled a laugh out of me. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled knowingly. "It always is. I recognize it because I wore that same look once." Her accent carried a rhythm both soft and strong. When she spoke, I could hear the waves in her words. She told me she'd lost her husband 15 years ago. Then slowly, her only son had drifted away after marrying a woman who saw her as an inconvenience rather than a mother. "I didn't punish them," she said simply. "I just stopped paying their bills." The line hit something deep inside me, quietly, like truth finding its echo. We drank in silence for a while. The tea was floral, faintly citrus, unlike anything I'd ever tasted. "What's in this?" I asked. "Lemon verbena, chamomile, and a little courage," she said with a wink. Outside, a fishing boat bobbed on the water, the men aboard calling out to each other in Portuguese. Their laughter floated through the open window, and for a moment, I felt the ache inside me ease. Lucia refilled my cup and asked, "Why did you come here, Margaret?" I hesitated. The question was too simple for the answer it demanded. "I suppose I wanted to remember who I was before everything I did was for someone else," I said. She nodded slowly. "And who were you?" "A woman who thought love meant disappearing quietly," I said, my voice smaller than I expected. Lucia didn't speak right away. She just looked at me, her eyes gentle but steady. "And now?" "Now I'm trying to love differently," I said. "Less like a shield, more like air." The tea had gone cool, but I kept drinking it. It grounded me somehow, the warmth, the taste of something alive. Then, Lucia asked a question no one ever had. "Tell me, what secret did you keep that still weighs on your chest?" I froze. My instinct was to deflect, to smile politely, but something in her voice made it impossible to lie, so I told her. "When my husband, Robert, was alive, he had a weak heart. Nothing too dangerous, the doctors said. Manageable with care, but I never told Claire." Lucia tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because she was in college and I didn't want her to worry. I told her he was fine, that we were both fine." I traced the rim of my teacup with my thumb. He had an episode one night while she was visiting. I made her leave before the ambulance arrived. Told her it was just a stomach ache. I swallowed hard. He died the next week. She never knew how bad it had been. She still doesn't. She thought I hid it from her to control things, but I did it to protect her, from fear, from guilt. Lucia didn't look away. She simply reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cool, her grip light but sure. "Love makes strange fools of us all," she said softly. "We think we're shielding others, but sometimes we're just giving them reasons to forget how strong they are." The words sank deep. The waves outside crashed louder for a moment, then settled again. Lucia let the silence work, not to fill it, but to allow it to breathe. "You didn't betray her," she said finally. "You carried pain alone because that's what you were taught love should look like. But love isn't martyrdom, Margaret. It's presence." Her eyes glistened. "When my son left, I blamed myself. Thought maybe if I'd given more, he'd have stayed. But giving isn't always loving. Sometimes it's just erased." Her words felt like a mirror held gently to my face. "I think I've been erasing myself for decades," I whispered. Lucia smiled, slow and warm. "Then it's time to rewrite. You've already started, haven't you?" I looked at the ocean through the window, the horizon endless and clear. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small against it. I felt part of it, vast, quiet, alive. We sat together until the light shifted from gold to silver, the day folding into evening. Lucia hummed a tune under her breath, something between a prayer and a lullaby. Before I left, she poured the rest of the tea into a small clay jar and handed it to me. "For the nights when you remember too much," she said, "it helps the heart breathe again." I thanked her, but words felt too small for the grace she'd given me. As I walked back to the villa, the sky glowed violet, the air soft with salt. Each step felt lighter. I realized I hadn't just come to the Azores to escape. I'd come to learn how to breathe again, to forgive not only my daughter, but also myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of healing. The first message came just after midnight, a soft vibration on the nightstand breaking through the sound of waves outside my window. I didn't look right away. I already knew who it was. When I finally reached for the phone, the screen glowed in the dark. Claire's name, a string of missed calls, then voicemails stacked one after another. I pressed play. Her voice, once so brisk and certain, now cracked and thin through the static. "Mom, please, I'm sorry, we're sleeping in hostels. Daniel's trying to fix things, but I shouldn't have lied. Please, call me back. I need to hear your voice." Another message followed. "Mom, I was stupid. I shouldn't have said those things. I didn't know you paid for everything. Please, I'll pay you back. I swear, just please pick up." There were more. Apologies tangled with excuses, the kind of words people find only when comfort is gone. I listened to them all one by one, sitting in the quiet glow of my small seaside room. The air smelled of salt and chamomile, Lucia's tea still steeping on the nightstand. Claire's voice trembled through the speaker. "I thought you'd always be there, Mom. I didn't realize what that meant until you weren't." Her words drifted into the room like smoke, thin and lingering. I could picture her now, sitting on a narrow hostel bed, mascara smudged, hair undone, Daniel pacing in the background, angry, helpless, looking for someone else to blame. There was a time I would have felt that old pull, the instinct to fix, to soothe, to send money and make the pain vanish. The muscle memory of motherhood doesn't fade easily. But something had shifted in me. The woman listening to those voicemails was not the same one who had once apologized for existing too loudly. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail, this one quieter. "Mom, I understand now. You weren't trying to control me. You were trying to protect me. I'm so sorry." Her voice broke into small, wet breaths. "I don't deserve you. Please, just tell me you're okay." I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel, but because I finally understood the difference between compassion and surrender. The room was dim, lit only by the lamp on the desk. I lifted the phone, held it in both hands like something fragile. One by one, I opened each message, listened, breathed, deleted. Slowly, not in anger, but with intention. Each swipe felt like releasing a ghost. Delete. The sound of rain outside the window. Delete. The quiet hum of the sea. The faint sigh of wind through the shutters. I watched the screen return to stillness, the last notification vanishing like a ripple smoothing out. The silence that followed was full. Not empty, not lonely. Full of space for me. I set the phone face down on the table. The waves kept their rhythm beyond the glass, unconcerned, eternal. In that moment, I felt no vengeance, no victory, only clarity. All my life, I thought, I rescued others. Nobody taught me how to rescue myself. The sentence landed like the truth, clean, final. I reached for my journal, a small leather one I'd bought at the airport. I wrote the line down in neat cursive, then another. Maybe peace begins when you stop rehearsing your pain. For years, I'd mistaken endurance for love, silence for grace. Now I knew they could also be prisons, built brick by brick from misplaced kindness. I stood and walked to the open window. The moon hung low, reflected in the water like a coin tossed toward forgiveness. I whispered, "I forgive you, Claire, but that doesn't mean I'll return to who I was." The wind carried the words away, soft and sure. From somewhere down the street, I heard music, a guitar, faint singing in Portuguese. It blended with the waves until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I turned off the lamp and let the moonlight fill the room. It painted everything silver, the bedspread, the teacup, the folder on my suitcase labeled personal. I thought of Lucia, of her calm eyes and the way she'd said, "You didn't punish them, you just stopped paying their bills." Perhaps this was what she meant. Not revenge, but release. The phone buzzed once more. I didn't pick up. Instead, I whispered to the quiet, "She'll be all right. She has to be." And then, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of rescue. It was late afternoon when I saw her car pull up. The light slanted gold across the porch, the kind of hour where everything looks softer than it really is. I stood by the window, not moving, just watching her step out. Claire looked smaller somehow. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. In her hands, she held a bouquet. Wilted carnations wrapped in the kind of shiny paper grocery stores use when they run out of fresh ones. She hesitated at the gate, took a breath, then walked up the path. I stayed where I was, letting her knock twice before opening the door. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was thin, brittle, like something that could break with one wrong word. "Claire?" She stood there a moment, unsure whether to hug me or not. I didn't move toward her, and neither did she. Instead, she extended the bouquet like an offering. "These are for you." I took them gently, the stems damp against my fingers. "Thank you," I said. "They've had a long trip." Her lips trembled, part smile, part shame. "Yeah, we, just got back yesterday." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Come in." The light through the window made everything golden. The old wooden table, the chipped teacups, the dust caught midair. She sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap, eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "I didn't think you'd let me in," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. We sat in silence. The only sound was the clock ticking, steady and impartial. I poured 2 cups of tea, mine calm, hers shaking slightly in her hand. "Mom," she began, her voice cracking, "we thought it'd be easier if you stayed." I looked up. "Easier for who?" She blinked, startled by the question. "I don't know. Daniel said—" She trailed off, her fingers tightening around the cup. The porcelain made a faint sound against the saucer. I waited. I had no intention of filling her silences for her anymore. Finally, she exhaled. "He said you'd slow us down, that you're too set in your ways." "Too old?" I asked gently. Her eyes darted away. "He didn't say that." "No," I said. "But you didn't disagree, did you?" Her lower lip quivered. She stared at the steam rising from her cup as if it could rewrite the air between us. "I thought maybe it would be simpler if you didn't come," she said finally. "I told myself it was just a vacation. It didn't mean anything." "But it did," I said. She nodded, tears welling. "Yes, it did." Outside, a car passed by, its engine fading into the distance. The quiet that followed was heavy but not cruel, the kind of silence that forces truth to take shape. Then she whispered, almost inaudibly, "Daniel said you're too boring to travel with." The words hung there, sharp and fragile. I felt them enter the room, settle in the air, and dissolve. "Thank you," I said after a long pause. Her head jerked up. "What?" "Thank you," I repeated calmly. "I prefer honesty. It arrives late, but it's lighter to carry." For a second, she looked as if she didn't understand. Then the meaning struck her, and her face crumpled. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't stop him." I laughed. I thought it was harmless. "Cruelty often hides behind laughter," I said. "It's easier to pretend it's a joke than to admit it's a choice." She started crying then. Not the polite kind of crying, but the deep, shaking kind that comes when shame finally meets its reflection. I let her cry. I didn't reach out, didn't rush to comfort her. For once, I didn't interrupt someone else's reckoning. The sunlight shifted again, catching the edges of her face. Young, lost, remorseful. I saw flashes of the child she once was, running barefoot through our backyard, hands sticky from melted ice cream. "Do you hate me?" she asked through her tears. "No," I said. "I stopped hating a long time ago. Hate keeps you tethered to the past. I just learned to stop waiting for kindness from people who think it's optional." She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I wanted to call you," she said, "but Daniel told me to wait until things calmed down. Then he started blaming me for everything. Said it was my fault for trusting you with the bookings, for not checking the credit card." I raised an eyebrow. "So he's still persuasive when it comes to rewriting stories." She gave a hollow laugh. "He left 2 days after we got back, said he needed space. I think he's gone for good." I stirred my tea, the spoon clinking softly. "Then space is the one thing you both finally agree on." Her tears came again, quieter this time. "I don't know how to fix this, Mom." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the daughter who'd betrayed me, but the woman who'd never learned what boundaries looked like, because I hadn't shown her. "Maybe it's not about fixing," I said. "Maybe it's about understanding." She swallowed hard. "Understanding what?" "That you and I both mistook silence for peace." Her shoulders sank. "I thought you didn't mind being left out." "I minded," I said softly. "But I told myself love meant staying quiet. It took me too long to learn that peace isn't the same as being unseen." The words settled between us. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the kitchen walls in amber light. Dust motes drifted through the air like slow-moving stars. Claire reached for my hand, hesitated, then finally took it. Her fingers were cold. trembling slightly. "I can't undo what I did," she whispered. "No," I said, squeezing her hand gently, "but you can choose who you become after it." Her grip tightened. "Do you think you can forgive me?" "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I give to you. It's something I give to myself so I can keep walking forward." She nodded, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. We sat there as the sun disappeared behind the trees, the light softening until only the golden outline of her face remained. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. "I miss Dad." "So do I said. "Every day. But I think he'd be proud of what we're doing right now, talking without pretending." She let out a shaky breath, half laugh, half sob. "He used to say you could end a war just by looking at someone." "Maybe that's all we're doing now," I said. "Ending a small war." The last light faded, and the kitchen fell into dusk. I stood, walked to the counter, and placed the wilted bouquet in a glass of water. The flowers would never bloom again, but they still deserved a place in the light. When I turned back, Claire was watching me, her face raw, her eyes softer than I'd seen in years. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for still opening the door." I smiled faintly. "Next time, try knocking before the storm." She laughed through her tears, the sound fragile but real. And for the first time, the silence between us didn't ache. It rested. The seasons turned quietly. Leaves fell, snow came and went, and the air softened again with spring. Months had passed since that evening when Claire stood in my doorway, holding a bouquet that couldn't quite survive the journey. In the beginning, her calls were brief, polite check-ins, awkward pauses. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Fine, honey. And you?" They were cautious exchanges, as if we were learning to speak a language neither of us had ever mastered. Honesty without guilt. But slowly, the distance began to loosen. Her calls grew longer. We spoke about ordinary things, recipes, movies, weather. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, just sat on the line while she folded laundry and I sipped tea. The silence no longer felt dangerous. One Sunday afternoon, she arrived unannounced, carrying a folder and 2 mugs from the local cafe. "Thought we could try something new," she said, smiling nervously. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the air had once been thick with confrontation. Now the light was softer, warmer. She spread out the folder, brochures, maps, a notebook filled with scribbles. "I've been thinking about taking a trip," she said. "Just not alone this time. I want to do it right." "Where to?" I asked. She hesitated. "Maybe Italy. I remember how Dad used to talk about Florence. I don't even know where to start." I couldn't help but smile. "That's not true. You already started. You opened the map." She laughed, a real laugh, lighter than I'd heard in years. "Okay, teacher, what do I do first?" I poured us tea, the steam curling between us like a familiar spirit returning home. "First," I said, "you decide what kind of traveler you are. Do you chase places or moments?" She tilted her head. "What's the difference?" "Chasing places is about the checklist," I said, tracing the rim of my cup. "Moments are slower. They stay with you. You don't just visit a city, you meet it." She nodded thoughtfully, writing that down in her notebook. "So, you plan for moments." "Exactly." We began sorting through the brochures. I showed her how to compare flights, how to read fine print on hotel policies. She took notes diligently, her handwriting looping like mine used to when she was little. At one point, she looked up and said, "You make this seem so easy." I smiled. You see, planning a trip isn't about control. It's about care. The same care I used to plan your life. The words hung in the air, not heavy, not sharp, just true. Claire's eyes softened. She looked at me for a long time, and I saw something settle inside her. Not guilt, not apology, but understanding. She reached across the table, resting her hand lightly over mine. "I never realized how much work you did behind the scenes," she said quietly. "All those things I took for granted, see, school forms, birthday parties, doctor appointments. It was all a kind of love, wasn't it?" "It was," I said, But love shouldn't erase the person giving it. She squeezed my hand. I know that now. We both smiled. Small, real smiles that needed no explanation. The kettle whistled, sharp then fading, and I poured more tea. The steam rose between us again, a soft veil connecting our reflections on the glossy surface of the table. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence was no longer a wound to fill, it was a bridge. Then she said, "When I was in Hawaii before everything fell apart, I kept seeing these older women traveling together. They looked so alive. I envied them. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. They weren't escaping. They were arriving." I looked at her, proud in a way I couldn't put into words. "Maybe that's what we're both doing now," I said. "Arriving." She nodded. "Mom, would you maybe come with me to Italy?" I considered it for a moment, then smiled gently. "Maybe," I said, "but this time you plan it. I'll just bring the tea." She laughed, that warm, full sound I'd missed for years. Deal. The sunlight outside deepened into gold, spilling across the table and catching the steam that danced between our cups. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and memory. For the first time, there was no need for apologies. No rehearsed forgiveness. Just two women, batsing. Mother and daughter finally sharing the same quiet without fear. I leaned back in my chair, watching her jot down flight times and notes about museums. Her hair caught the light the same way Robert's once had. For a fleeting second, it felt like he was still here. Not as a ghost, but as the echo of everything we'd built and learned to rebuild. Claire looked up from the notebook. "You know, you were right," she said. "About what? Silence does cost more than words, but sometimes it buys something better. Perspective." I smiled. "That's a good price." She reached for her cup, clinked it gently against mine. "To new beginnings," she said. "To new beginnings," I echoed. The tea was still hot, fragrant and alive. We sipped together as the sun sank lower, the light turning amber, then rose. Between us, the steam curled upward, fragile yet whole, a small, shimmering bridge between two hearts finally breathing in rhythm again. By late spring, the garden had woken again. The air smelled of soil and rain, of things returning quietly to life. I wore Robert's old sun hat and gardening gloves that had faded from years of use. The ground was soft beneath my knees, cool and forgiving. Mrs. Price had given me a rose cutting last week. Evelyn, a pale blush hybrid she'd tended since her husband passed. "She blooms late," she'd said, pressing the fragile stem into my palm. "But she always blooms again." Now, as I pressed the small root into the earth, I realized it wasn't just a plant I was tending. It was something of myself. I covered the roots gently, patting the soil down with careful hands. The sunlight fell in thin golden ribbons through the branches above, warming the back of my neck. Behind me, the kettle inside began to hum, a low, steady song that had become the soundtrack of my mornings. I sat back on my heels, brushing dirt from my gloves, and looked around the garden. The fence needed painting. The bird bath still leaned slightly to one side, but it was mine. Imperfect, patient, alive. The wind moved through the leaves, soft and knowing. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it carry the warmth across my face. Somewhere nearby, Mrs. Price's radio played faintly through an open window, a slow piano piece, delicate and unhurried, and over it, I heard my own voice in memory. "Enjoy yourself." I had said it to Claire once, a sentence meant to hide the hurt. Now it meant something different. Some gardens bloom again once you stop watering weeds. That line came to me like a truth I'd always known but never dared to say aloud. The weeds had been many things: guilt, obligation, the kind of love that demanded silence in return. I had pulled them out one by one until there was room again for something real to grow. The rose cutting stood small but steady in the soil. It looked fragile now, but I knew how resilience disguised itself. I took off my gloves and placed them on the stone ledge beside me. My hands were lined and worn, but no longer trembling. From the porch, the tea kettle clicked off. I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked inside. The kitchen was bright with sunlight, the air thick with the scent of lemon and mint. On the counter sat 2 cups, one for me, one for whoever might visit. I poured the tea slowly, watching the steam rise. It curled upward the same way it had between Claire and me weeks ago, a quiet thread of connection renewed. Through the open window, I could see the rose cutting again, standing in its small circle of light. The petals hadn't opened yet, but I knew they would. That's how healing works. Not in sudden blooms, but in slow, steady roots. I carried my tea out to the porch, sat in Robert's old rocking chair, and listened to the world move gently around me. The birds, the wind, the soft clink of porcelain against wood. There was peace in the ordinary, something I'd once mistaken for emptiness. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for an apology or a phone call or an invitation to belong. I already did. I looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to sink into gold. The light caught the edges of the garden, the new rows, and even the old cracks in the stone path. Everything glowed. I took a sip of tea and smiled to myself. I once said, "Enjoy yourself," I whispered. I meant it. I just didn't know I was talking to me. The breeze lifted, soft but certain, carrying the scent of the rosebud and something like forgiveness. I closed my eyes. Robert's laughter flickered through memory, Lucia's voice telling me to breathe, Claire's tentative laughter from our last call. It all blended into one sound, not sorrow, not nostalgia, just life continuing, gentle and unafraid. The piano from Mrs. Price's radio drifted through the air again, its notes slow and bright, like footsteps leading home. I set the cup down beside me and leaned back in the chair, letting the music and the sunlight fill the spaces that used to ache. Voiceover. If you've ever been replaced, forgotten, or silenced, remember, you don't need to raise your voice to reclaim your life. The wind rustled through the new rose, its leaves trembling like soft applause. Fade to light. Then, a final question. Simple, steady, like the closing of a door gently left ajar. Would you have forgiven her?